In my last video, I mentioned I had already been boating in 2024, and on January the 6th, I managed my first day at sea, and this video is about that trip. The days are short during January, so I didn't want to travel far from home, and chose to go round the island of Seil, which is only a few miles south of Oban. I arrived at Elna Beach around 8:30 a.m, just as it was starting to get light, and by the time I carried my 2.75 F-rib and 6 horsepower outboard to the water's edge and assembled it, it was light enough to set off safely. My plan for the day was to leave Elna Beach, head out the Sound of Seil in a clockwise direction, and nip across to Inch Island. Then head back to Seil and land for morning coffee at Arden Capel. Explore the reefs there before heading for Elian Dune and the sheltered inlet of Pool Idrobrain. From there, head down the Clachan Sound and under the bridge across the Atlantic, past Mulvicar and on to Torsa Island. Then head through the Cuan Sound and head back to Elna Beach, going round the island of Easdale on the way. The drone was also looking forward to a new year with plenty of exercise, as it too had been housebound during the recent winter storms. I let it loose for a nosy around before leaving Elna Beach. And then I was off, easing my way out the Sound of Easdale, into the Firth of Lorne, making my way towards Inch Island. I enjoyed hazy views across to the islands of Scarborough and the Garvalachs as the rolling swell bobbed the boat about. Approaching Inch Island, it felt fantastic being back at sea, the first time for me since 2023, and that was a very poor year for being at sea. There was 2 reasons I wanted to cross to Inch Island. The first reason being the low winter sun was shining in its eastern flank, making it look very attractive for the video, whereas the Seil coastline was in the shade, which would make it very difficult to see against the bright sun. The second reason was I wanted to see the little cave house the owner of the island used to live in. He was a bit of an eccentric and chose to live here alone. The remains of his hut, his water tank which collected rainwater, and a little 2-room house he built in the cave are still here, but he left several years ago. Everything is slowly decaying, and he could be too, as I have no idea what happened to him. Having travelled the length of Inch Island, I headed back to Seil, giving this boat plenty of space. Not long later, I was happily making my way along the shaded Seil coastline, heading for a peninsula where I turned back on myself to reach the little slate harbour at Arden Capel Estate. I landed and set up a sheltered seat for my favourite boating distraction, a hot cup of coffee. A very welcome beverage on such a freezing cold January day. After the warming beverage, I set the drone loose for an overhead view of the area. It brought back memories of the first time I visited Arden Capel. It was in the early 60s and I was in a 2-week Boy Scout camp. I recall it rained every single day, but I also earned my rowing badge from the local Sea Scout group, the only formal boating qualification I have. I have learned a lot since those early days, mostly self-taught or from my friends the kayakers. I jumped back into the boat and made my way through the reefs, watching the depths carefully in the fish finder and also visually looking for dark shapes or disturbances in the sea surface, indicating rocks below. I also took great care not to run over any of the locals. Once clear of the reefs, I headed for Easdale Doon, a small rocky island. Around 15 years ago, I noticed a couple of feral goats had made their home on it. Now there are around 30 goats, and I do wonder if the island is still sustainable to live on due to the lack of food. However, it doesn't seem to stop them multiplying. I mused to myself it was a bit like the human race, who still keep breeding despite knowing the world is getting harder and harder to live in. I then crossed to the well-known anchorage of Poole-de-Brain, where I landed to let the drone have a scout around. In summer it's often full of yachts, but there was not another boat in sight in January. Once the drone came back, I clambered back into the boat and nipped round the corner into the entrance of the Clachan Sound. Like all my journeys at sea, I had timed my journey perfectly to suit the tides. High tide was only 20 minutes away, and even then the entrance to Sound was only 18 inches deep. If I'd been much earlier, it would have been too shallow to go round the island of Seil. The strong, low sun made it difficult to see the bridge, so I kept my speed well down. It was around 2.5 feet deep under the bridge at high tide. Oh, it was halfway between neaps and spring tides. Once under the bridge, I landed to get some aerial views of the Clachan Sound, and the only bridge which crosses the Atlantic Ocean, or so the guidebooks say. Although it was a lovely, calm and sunny day to be out and about, it was bitterly cold, and both the camera and drone batteries, plus the spares, were draining fast. So I continued down the sound towards the island of Torsa. I took my time going down the rest of the Clachan Sound, as I was in no hurry, and thoroughly enjoying my day in the water. Of course, the drone wouldn't let me pass the island of Torsa without landing on it, so I did and let it loose once again. And once again I jumped back into the boat and headed down the tidal waters of the Cuan Sound towards the open sea, avoiding the Ling ferry on the way. Leaving the Cuan Sound behind, I then crossed the sea towards the island of Easdale, just to round off a perfect day. There was a reasonable swell running on the Seil and seaward side, and as I was only 30 metres from its jagged rocky coast, I knew why I bought the new Yamaha 6 horsepower outboard. Repairing and keeping the very worn-out old one could have cost me far more than money if it broke down and I ended up thrown onto the rocks on a freezing cold winter's day. Looking across to Inch Island, I thought, hey, I have been there already, so I turned into the Sound of Easdale and landed at Elena Beach, where I had left 5 hours ago. I packed the small boat back into the car and headed for home. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.